So this issue of federalism is very, very important. Suddenly you have governors like Cuomo and Newsom and others who never believed in this, saying, hey, the president doesn't have the right to open up the businesses in our state if we don't think he should. He's violating the Constitution. He's a monarch. He's a dictator. Now, this is fascinating coming from these governors. Let's walk this through very slowly. Let's take Cuomo as an example. Cuomo has the legal authority to order beds, to order ventilators before pandemics. He, the state, is in charge of how many hospitals they want, whether hospitals can expand, or whether they have MRIs and CTs. This is a state power. It's always been a state power. So what happens when this virus hits? He doesn't have enough ventilators, he says, and he doesn't have enough beds, he says. So he keeps saying the federal government needs to provide this, the federal government. He didn't say, this is federalism, we're in charge, federal government, stay out of this, did he? No. He says, we need you to give us ventilators, we need you to give us beds. And the president moves mountains to do exactly that. And it turns out he didn't need as many ventilators and beds as he said he did, or that Fauci or Birx said that he might. The models have been terribly wrong. But back to federalism. What else has he said? This has really hit our budget badly. We're never going to be able to catch up. So the federal government needs to bail us out in our budget. What he and Illinois and California, the governors in these states really want is for the rest of us to bail out their pension plans and their debt that they had, which was significant long before this pandemic. But why is it the responsibility of the federal government to bail out states? So this is federalism. It's not one-way federalism. It's federalism. Therefore, if you're a state and you have your sovereignty and you want control over your hospitals, which they do, you want control over your beds, which they do, you want control over your ventilators, which they do, that's what state law has. In the case of New York, that law was passed in the 1960s, certification of notice laws, that's what they're called. Well, why does it only cut one way? So now the President of the United States says, you know, I'll be the one who determines whether you open or not. No, he's backed off that position. And there are federalist issues involved. There are constitutional issues involved, and I'll get to those in a minute, but first I want to point out the hypocrisy. So when Cuomo goes around and others saying he wants to be a monarch, well, I thought they wanted a monarch. You have Pelosi, who wanted him to nationalize various businesses. You even had some Sunday television hosts going on about how there should be a national shelter-in-place edict by the President of the United States. All kinds of demands that the President of the United States do this, that, and the other, and he has the power to do it. Chuck Schumer wanted him to appoint a general, a czar, if you will, to be in charge of the supply chain. So it's not that they're opposed to a monarchy, or worse, and yet now they pretend they support federalism. When you read Woodrow Wilson, Herbert Crowley, John Dewey, Rye, and these others, when you read them, the early intellectuals of the progressive movement, they rejected federalism, they rejected the Constitution. In fact, Woodrow Wilson famously wrote, and I paraphrase, it's in my book, that we have a living and breathing Constitution. You've heard that phrase. He's the one that came up with it. And what did he mean by that? He meant the body politic is like a human body. You've got different organs. You can't have organs working against each other, separated from each other. It's one unity, it's one whole, that is the body. So you have to look at the country as a body, many ways as you would look at the human body. So you have a living and breathing Constitution, so the country can survive, that's the argument. And so they reject the idea of checks and balances, they reject the idea of limited federal powers, they abhor the 10th Amendment. Thurgood Marshall, a Supreme Court justice at one time, he was famously said that the 10th Amendment is simply a statement of fact. But so what? And the Supreme Court rarely uses the 10th Amendment when it rules. In fact, it's done other things that I'll talk about in a moment. So this federalism idea is something worth discussing, but then let's discuss it. You have conservatives, conservative editorial pages saying the president has no authority. This is a state police power. I agree with them if you just look at the Constitution. But what about 80 years of Supreme Court cases and decisions? You have to look at that too. Franklin Roosevelt, there's your monarch. Franklin Roosevelt, he's the one that that reached into states and said, I can regulate commerce within states, only states and not interstate. The Commerce Clause is not called the Commerce Clause. What is it called? It's called the Interstate Commerce Clause. That is, the federal authorities were never supposed to have any control over commerce within a state, only between and among states. And I'll show you how FDR and his court got around that. And that is what gives the president the power to act, should he choose to act. I don't like it. I don't like the decision. It was a bastardization of the Commerce Clause, but it's there.